Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and a very good morning to all of you. I am Afika, will be your host for today. Sir Ivan Sadat Nurhat would like to welcome you to our live webinar on Shariah Framework for Shariah Compliance Review, Audit and Governance. So here is a housekeeping during our webinar. All attendees will be on listening mode during the presentation. Please click the raise hand button if you want to speak directly to the speaker or key in the question at the chat box. Evaluation e-form link will be shared at the chat box at the end of the session. And then don't forget to fill it. Allow me to introduce to you our speaker. Our speaker is Professor Dr. Rusni Hassan. She is a Dean at Institute of Islamic Banking and Finance, IIIBF, International Islamic University Malaysia, IIUM. So without further ado, please welcome Doctor.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh and a very good morning, everyone.
Morning, Doctor. Morning.
Morning, everyone. Okay. Thank you very much, sir, for the invitation for me to have a session with everyone, very distinguished participants of today's session. I can see that very, what we call it, impressive list of the learners that we are having today. So basically what I am sharing with everyone is more on sharing a bit of my thought on the topic on Islamic, on the Sharia governance, as well as compliance and audit. So basically, this is the topic, the area of which my area of expertise and specialization is. I am the in IIUM Institute of Islamic Banking and Finance, International Islamic University. So the session, inshallah, that I would really welcome. I hope the session will be more interactive. Okay, an interactive session means that if you have anything that you would like to ask, any questions, please don't hesitate. Because I believe that you are beyond the classroom or so-called training, but it's more on, we are hoping that there will be exchange of views and ideas on the topics that we are discussing today, inshallah. So, well, the time allocated is 2 hours. Let's have a break in the middle, okay, that so that what we call it, we can, you know, have a break in a while, forever, inshallah. Sorry, for instance, okay, then, okay, let's move on, okay, on the topic that we are looking at, okay. Now, the I'm going to start with basically with the preamble of our discussion today. The discussion that we will be having is more on 3 items in particular. One is on the Sharia framework, Sharia framework for Islamic banking and finance, which is this preamble that I'm going to start with. Number 2 is that on the Sharia governance, okay, Sharia governance. And last but not least will be on the Sharia control function, which is specifically, we will be looking at the Sharia audit and Sharia review, the topic that we are discussing today. So why I am putting this preamble, because this is to put the discussion in the context of Sharia and Sharia compliance. When we go to the very basic understanding to put the fundamentals that when we talk about Islamic banking and finance, it is something that we cannot avoid to say that, and then we have to acknowledge that it is based on the principles of Sharia. Now, all the way along, since from the very establishment of Islamic banking and finance, the principles of Sharia is always embedded, is always there together. However, of course, in terms of the development, in terms of the approach of Islamic banking and finance, we can see that governance and compliance does not, you know, from the very beginning, from the establishment of Islamic finance, it was not the kind of the terminology, for example, Sharia governance. The Sharia governance in Islamic banking and finance was only known year back in 2010, if I were to say, that was where the first 2009-2010 of which Malaysia started introducing its Sharia governance framework for Islamic banking and finance. And the model on the Sharia governance then was, until now, is still being replicated in many countries. Yeah. So many countries have followed our Sharia governance framework for Islamic banking and finance. Okay, following, what we are doing, exactly what we are doing. Now, our Sharia governance framework is actually based on the principles of Sharia governance standards that have been issued by IFSB. That was a year back in 2009. Okay. Second, of course, after Sharia governance, then 2013, we have IFSAM, Islamic Financial Services Act. Now, Islamic Financial Services Act start introducing the Sharia compliance terminology. Not to say that we don't comply from the Sharia we don't comply with the Sharia principle from the very beginning, but the approach or the what we call it, the approach on Sharia compliance was mainly emphasized by IFSAM. Yeah? But the fact that from day one, when we have Islamic banking finance, we have the components of the Sharia, and the Sharia shall always be the prevailing principles underlying. And thus the context of our discussion today, Sharia compliance and Sharia governance. Yeah. So then I'm putting into the perspective in these slides as a preamble to put the foundation that, well, when we talk about Islamic banking and finance, definitely the principles of Sharia are not to be compromised. And if we were to champion or if we were to know about Islamic banking and finance, we can't avoid ourselves from looking into what Sharia principles is all about. Yeah. Now, from the Sharia principles, okay, the components of the Sharia, there are few components of the Sharia. We have the belief, the dealings, the worships, the ibadah, the muamalat, as well as the morality. These are the components of Sharia that must always be embedded in the practice of Islamic finance. If I were to give a simple example, i'tiqad means that you need to believe into the system. When the Sharia says that's no riba, no interest, then you need to believe in that. Okay. Now, most of our transactions in Islamic finance are based on the principles of muamalat. So thus, main discussion in Islamic finance is always on the transaction aspects and whatnot. But being it in Islamic finance, based on the principles of Sharia, you must have the principle of morality. Because morality is a component of the Sharia. Islamic finance cannot be complete Islamic finance without this morality concept, or without this morality, I would say, components and whatnot. Now, part of the aspect of morality is, example, the giving of zakat. We are giving zakat, which is a compulsory for Islamic finance. And why it is considered as part of the akhlaq? Because we are helping the people who are in poverty, who are in poor. Okay, zakat is meant specifically for that. We must always be good to others. Now, ESG, being sustainable or being good to people, planet, and earth, for example, is part of the morality, which is actually components of the Sharia itself. From day one, Sharia and Islamic finance, or Islamic finance, say no to tobacco, say no to weapons, for example, say no to the companies or who are doing what we call it, who are distracting the environment and whatnot. Actually, from day one, it is already there in our list of the company or the business that Islamic finance can do. Okay. So now, however, most of the what we call it, as of now, the in thing we are talking about ESG, we are talking about green financing and whatnot, but it is part and parcel of the Sharia itself. Sorry. Now, another important aspect is that on Islamic finance is that we need to ensure that all what we are doing, the overall operation, contracts, products and services must always follow the requirement of the contract. As I did mention just now, that the biggest component is the muamalat or the fiqh or the transactions. And those transactions, we need to ensure that everything is done in a good manner. Yeah, not only the product is and services is based on the Shariah contracts, and thus in Islamic finance, we talk about the tawarruk, we talk about all those Shariah contracts, which is unknown to conventional. To conventional perspective is always lending and borrowing, but in Islamic finance, we have different types of the Shariah contract. Yeah, and those Shariah contracts can be either sale-based, either can be partnership-based, either can be ijarah-based or lease-based, and so on and so forth. So that is the first thing. All the terms and conditions of the contractual transactions must follow the requirement of the contracts, of those of the specific contracts. The legal documentations, the drafting of the documents must always be according to the Shariah principles. And as I did mention earlier, this is where the requirement on Shariah compliance is. Now we know that Shariah compliance is something which is fundamental. How are we going to ensure that Shariah compliance is to be in a proper place, is properly executed, is properly observed? Then Islamic finance industry come out with the Shariah governance framework. So the Shariah governance framework is basically the tools or the models or the way on how we are ensuring that Shariah principles are intact in the Islamic finance operation and practices. In whatever Islamic finance doing, that we need to ensure that the principles of Shariah or the maqasid of Shariah or the objectives of Shariah are always there. We need to protect the religion, to protect the people, protect the property, and nasab posterity as well as the intellect. We shouldn't be going against these principles of maqasid al-Shariah. Now, if we were to put in the context of conventional, for example, these are the principles that well embedded in the concept of equitability, for example, equity, and whatnot. We need to be fair to the consumer. We need to be fair to every single one. We need to protect the interests of the right of individual against, we call it for the property and whatnot. All these are actually come under these principles of maqasid al-Shariah. Of course, for this session, this is not the session for us to talk about the maqasid Shariah. But my point is that to say that when we talk about Islamic finance, it's always talking about the principles of Shariah underlying the fundamentals, and the way we do things is always Shariah. And thus, Shariah compliance is definitely something that is highly required. It must be, that is what we call it, mandatory for us. And then how can we ensure Shariah compliance? Okay, the answer to that by having good Shariah governance practices and exercise. And one of the function in the Shariah governance exercise and practice is audit, review, and whatnot. And why we are doing this? Because we want to ensure Shariah compliance. Am I sorry? Am I doing good so far? Any question? Anyone would like to give some thought? Please. Ms. Sumati, you want to say something, or you want to give your input?
Doctor, I think we are fine with doctors so far. The way of this explanation. Good.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay.
So far, okay, doctor, no problem.
Okay, that's great. Okay, let's move. Now, of course, as I did mention, the Shariah contract. Why I am highlighting on the Shariah contracts, because, okay, later on when we discuss about Shariah review and Shariah audit, one of the main, what we call it, scope of the exercise, Shariah review exercise is specifically is actually on the Shariah contract. They must ensure that implementation of the Shariah contract in Islamic banking and finance. Okay, when we talk about Islamic banking and finance, that's also include takaful as well as capital market. Okay, must be following the Shariah contracts. I think that is one of the main, what we call it, scope of the Shariah review in particular. Audit will be doing the same, but bigger in terms of the scope. Yeah, because audit can also look into the governance, for example. Okay, the governance, they can do the governance or Shariah governance audit. Review, however, is very specific because they normally look into the Shariah compliance, implementation, or operationalization of the what we call it, products and services offered by the IFI. Yeah. Okay. And this we need to be looking at. I'm going to skip this because this is only the just putting in, things into the perspective. These are the requirement or the item that we normally in the Shariah review will be having the checklist, whether the contract that they have entered into have been executed in a good manner. Is there any offer, whether the offer and acceptance fulfill the requirement based on the contract. If we have, for example, a credit card, okay, where is the offer, where is the acceptance, what are the terms and conditions, what are the price and the considerations. If you have home financing, for example, is it floating, is it fixed? All those are the price and considerations under this requirement of the akad. Okay? So those are normally the checklists that Shariah review will be having when checking whether the product has been executed in a good manner or not. Why Shariah review have to be doing that? Because if you do not fulfill the requirement of this contract, the contract is not good. The contract is not valid. The implication is that if the contract is not executed well, okay, missing all these, for example, or some of these requirements, then the contract may not be valid. When the contract is not valid, then there will be issue of recognition of the profit that we get from such a transaction or products. Yeah. Now, that is the reason why one of the very, what we call it, substantial work of the Shariah review team, okay, is to look into whether the contract fulfill these requirements or not. Okay. In addition to that, of course, there could be some other things. For example, not only that fulfilling the requirement, but it could be also the contract has an element of riba, of gharar, and so on and so forth. So we need to avoid that. Yep. Now, the challenge that we face is that we have different contracts in Islamic banking and finance. Okay, so these are some examples that we do have. That, of course, this is not exhaustive. These are some examples of the contract that in the industry and in Islamic banks, you may find the contract based on this, depending on case-to-case basis. Bank A may have a different product, but Bank B may have a different contract for the same product. In Bank A, for example, in Bank Islam for for vehicle financing, they have a murabahah contract. But in Maybank Islamic, okay, for vehicle financing, their contract is ijarah thumma al-bay'. Okay, for credit card, okay, for example, in Bank A or in Bank B, in Bank C and whatnot, all are tawarruk contract. What I am saying, but I believe that you know that now most of the product, 90, I would say, % or more are tawarruk based contracts. Yeah, and thus it brings up a bit of the issue of over concentration of tawarruk in Islamic banking and finance in the country. Yeah, of course, that what we are having as of now. But then again, I'm not going to what we call it, delve into that because that is a different session for us to discuss. Okay, the purpose is only for this slide is only to share that Islamic finance is unique because each contract behave differently, and one product, which is the similar product that offered by bank A and bank B and C and D, may be of different contract. Yeah. So if, for example, I always advise what we call it, panel, for example, legal firm who are advising banks and whatnot. Okay, not necessarily that one bank have a home financing and then you're having the same. No, it's not. And even they are having the same contract. Let's say home financing based on tawarruk. I believe that everyone, all of us know about tawarruk. But the fact that the tawarruk may be executed in a different manner. Because in tawarruk, it could be tawarruk based on single agency, and it could also be based on double agency. Yeah. So we have tawarruk on single agency. We have also tawarruk for double agency. Yeah. So the point is here again, now, and then we may have in one bank, in Maybank Islamic, tawarruk for home financing, tawarruk for deposit, tawarruk for deposit, tawarruk for what we call it, other products for project financing. You know, the structure of each of the product, tawarruk will be different. Okay, then most probably it is different. Okay, the structure and whatnot. So it's always important for us to check. And thus, you know, what again, thus the importance of having a good understanding on these contracts. Yeah. And I believe that at this point of time, you may, what we call it, understand why then we need the Shariah governance, we need the Shariah review. Why Shariah review is always making noise that you are not following that, you should be doing that, you should be doing that, and whatnot. Yeah? Because the nature of Islamic finance, not only that they have different types of contracts, but one contract may be of different in terms of the transaction structure while they are executing it from one product to the other within the same institution. Yeah. So it has to be following that rule, that execution. Again, why? The point is that here, because we need to follow the condition. What are the conditions that you need to be doing? Because each of these contracts have a different conditions. And then how to execute it is also different. And thus, okay, the importance of having a very deep in-depth, I would say strong Shariah governance processes that we need to be observing throughout. Yeah. So we have yet to talk about Shariah risk management. We have yet to talk about other things, for example, right? We are looking on the perspective of the execution, the products that Islamic banks is having as of now. Okay. Yep. Now, of course, they have three or few Shariah contracts that mainly we are using. Okay. Now, okay, are we doing good as of now, everyone? Okay. Can I see the thumbs up?
Yeah, Doctor, I'm okay.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Okay. Now, let's move on to the second part of it, okay? On the Shariah compliance requirement. Okay? As I did mention that I prompted in the beginning that Shariah is part and parcel of Islamic finance. We need to comply with the Shariah requirement. Now, the challenge that we are facing is always that we are in the, what we call it, financial intermediation. Islamic banking system that we are having is actually based on the conventional financial intermediation. In the conventional financial intermediation, the contract is always loan. Yeah. So bank and the customer's relationship shall always be based on loan contract. I believe that many of you are from the legal background. We have the condition, we have the, what we call it, the cases, the condition precedents that been established long time ago by Foley versus Hill. Foley versus Hill stated clearly that when banks and the customer have entered into the contractual transactions, they must always be, okay, their contractual transaction shall always be based on lending and borrowing. Now, we have loan in all conventional banking and finance transaction. So the way how we evaluate and whatnot is always based on this. Compared to the Islamic finance, we have numbers of the concepts and contracts, conditions, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So having that, okay, that the question is that can we use the financial intermediation as the framework, as the what we call it operating platform for us? The answer to that is yes, no problem, because we still have between bank and the customer, okay, bank and the what we call it financier and the client, and so on and so forth. But the contracts that we are having is different. Okay, so then, and we are not talking about lender and borrower at all time, but we are talking about lessor, lessee, seller, purchaser, and in most of our, for the purpose of facilitating and then standardization, the documentation, the banks or our legal documentation stated bank and the customer, financier and client. But we need to understand bank at that point of time, if they enter into tawarruk, refers to what function are they doing. Are they agent at that time? Are they seller or are they purchaser? Or are they agent? Okay. Now in ijarah, for example, in ijarah thumma al-bay', bank is the lessor. Okay. In murabahah, bank is the seller. Bank is the purchaser from the customer. So even though you are bank and the customer, but your murabahah legal documentations, bank is the purchaser, whereas in ijarah, bank is lessor, not the is the lessor and owner. Okay, so that makes our what we call it legal documentation is a bit I would say not to say complex, because as of now I believe that we beyond that level of complexity, because our knowledge and whatnot are much better, we understand it, right? But the fact that it cannot be kind of straightforward kind of thing, but rather than it has to be look into case-to-case basis. Okay, so the challenge is always, however, that when we are so used with the conventional way of doing things, okay, then the question here is that to adopt a different concept and principles, this lead to a lot of confusion, I would say, and there is also possibility that it is prone to mistakes, prone to error and whatnot, right? So, you know, and thus the importance of having a rigorous Shariah compliance checking. Yeah. Now, to Islamic finance, okay, absence or missing the date, or when you sign the document on the documentation, you miss the date. Okay, you forgot to put the date. You forgot to put the time. Is something that is very damaging, right? To the conventional, it may not. It may not. But to Islamic, you forgot to put the date. You forgot to put the time when your contract is executed, is damaging. Why? Because your contract may be having an element of gharar, uncertainty, which is not tolerated in Islamic Shariah, and therefore your contract cannot be a valid and good one. Now, when your contract is not valid, Shariah do not recognize the income that you get from such a transaction. Yeah? So means that, okay, if the banks have disbursed the amount of money, for example, for car financing, let's say 500,000, Okay, so bank disbursed the money already, okay, to the customer and thus the car dealer, basically, right? But the documentation after checking, for example, after checking, Shariah review check, and says that, oh, okay, you didn't put the date and time, and that amounting the contract to become gharar. Now, bank in this case cannot take up, because remember, if bank disburse 500, banks get back 600. Let's say I'm putting the simple amount, so a simple number here, right? So bank cannot recognize the profit that the banks charge to the customer. Okay, if the bank got it earlier, before the finding, okay, for example, you have already disbursed the amount, and then the financing have started, for example, 2 years ago, and banks start collecting the money already, right? Because customers is paying you the installment, which is principal and profit. Okay, bank can get the principal, bank cannot get the profit. Why bank can get the principal? Because it belongs to your depositor and investor. That's why. Okay, that is the basis basically, right? A simple basis on that. Eh? But profit, bank cannot get profit out of that. Yeah. So, for example, for the 2 years, banks have already collected 20,000, and 5,000 is the profit. So the 5,000 cannot be recognized as profit to the bank. So what happened if you do not do it right in terms of the contract execution just now, just missing the name, what we call it, the time and date, for example, okay? Not only that, the bank need to do the calculation back again, how much that you have paid, how much, whatever it is, how much is cost and whatnot, how much is the profit for the past 2 years. Now, let it be 2 years, okay? How, for long-term financing, for example, for 20 years, 10 years already been done. Bank must calculate back how much is the profit and whatnot, okay? That they have already taken. And number 2 is that once they need to be looking at, you know, the account back and whatnot. Number 2, that they need to get, once they identify, once they confirm how much is the amount of profit that they have collected, whereas the contract was wrong, the contract was not good, missing the signature, missing the time and date just now, okay, then this profit need to be channeled to charity. Okay? So the 5,000 need to be channeled to charity. And number 3, bank cannot just be doing it, okay, wow, it was our mistake lah. It was our fault. We were the one who did not executed it well, right? And then we start calculating and whatnot. Okay, we identify 5,000. 5,000 need to be channeled to charity. Just keep it to ourselves so that others do not know about it. Because it could be on our side. The weakness is on our side, right? Negligence kind of thing. Okay. But they cannot be doing that. They must report it. So means that you need to be very transparent. You need to be very transparent. Banks have to be very transparent. Telling that actually there was some mistake there, and the 5,000 that we have taken, we have already cleansed it up and we have channeled it to charity. This is what is required on Islamic banks. We are doing that. We have to be doing that. And thus, you know, my point just now, our Shariah governance, the process and whatnot need to be very rigorous enough so that to ensure that this incident will not happen. Because there's a lot of things, the implication. Yeah? And that's the reason why we are having Shariah governance policy stated that your Shariah governance process must be rigorous enough, must be robust, must be effective, must be efficient. Yeah? And who are doing this? Shariah review. Yeah? Why? Then again, because Shariah review is the the function that ensure compliance. And in our context of discussion, we are talking about Shariah compliance. Yeah. So my point here that now that I am putting the perspective that why the importance of Shariah governance, Shariah review exercise, and so on and so forth, because the implication is huge if we didn't do it right. Yeah. So we want to avoid that. Now, I'm giving an example of 5,000 is the profit that you need to channel to charity. Yeah. If you are talking about your corporate client and whatnot, the 5,000, if it is translated into 5 million, 50 million, 500 million, do you think that the shareholders is happy? Definitely, they are not, right? Yeah, Mr. Sitamparan is smiling. Yes, if I were the shareholder also, I will not be happy, right? Because we are not talking about 500,000 ringgit. We're talking about 500 million. What business are you doing, guys? So that is where then, you know, why then into the perspective that I'm putting into the, and put the emphasis that Shariah governance is very important for us. So we must make sure that all the process, because when I talk about Shariah governance, as I mentioned, to me, how I look at it, it is a platform, it is the exercise, the way, methodology to ensure that you are doing it right, so that there will be no loss, there will be no such risk that may happen in future. Yeah. Now, the bigger one out of this, you know, implication and whatnot is the image to the bank and to the Islamic financial institution. Can you imagine if you have an Islamic bank and every single year there are reports on Shariah non-compliant like this, right? What do you think, right? So, you know, this is image which definitely we want to avoid. We want to avoid that because you cannot put it, you know, between your own group only, because you have to put it, you have to report it in your annual report. This is required. So good, because we are transparent, but every now and then, every year, then, for example, there is SNC, there is Shariah non-compliant, and then the amount is big, and then there is no kind of reducing, then there's something wrong with the company then. Yeah. So we want to avoid such a risk, basically. So this is basically among other things that we are looking at in terms of the Shariah compliance checklist, if I were to say, based on the Shariah requirement just now, whether what we are doing are Shariah compliance, do we provide financing for tobacco-based businesses, for example? Okay, that, you know, we go for the first checklist is already crossed. Cannot. You cannot be giving the financing for Genting kind of, you know, that cannot, right? So that is something that we need to be putting. This is basically what I'm sharing in these slides is more on the checklist, on the aspects that Shariah compliance and Shariah review basically are looking at. That's the main their job basically in the scope of their exercise. Okay. Now, of course, Shariah compliance throughout. Okay, either during the product development, you know, when you are giving the Shariah advisories and whatnot. Okay. Here actually I'm putting into the perspective that it is, when we talk about Shariah compliance, it requires a set of processes that you need to be doing. You need to be doing throughout the Islamic banking and takaful company and Islamic capital market company, right? So it has to be all the way along throughout the operations, and the functions have to be integrated well. Integrated well means that all these functions need to be talking to one another. They understand. It doesn't work if for example, you know, component are not talking. For example, Shariah supervision are not talking to with the Shariah review. I don't understand you. You quarrel, kind of thing. I disagree with you. No, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. So it's always doing things together to ensure Shariah compliance. I think that's basically the spirit of Shariah governance. That is basically the true what we call it objective of the Shariah governance. Board must be playing their role. What is the role of the board in the Shariah governance? Ensure that all the policies relating to Shariah compliance are in place. They must ensure that, you know, everything that you do is effective, communication is effective and whatnot. What the management need to be doing must ensure that the people that they hire to work on this, whatever it is, are competent. Yeah. Okay, so these are things that we need to be looking at as overall Shariah governance. Now, in the Malaysian perspective, of course, yeah. Now, I start off just now saying that Shariah compliance is part and parcel of the Islamic finance. Right? So we do Islamic finance, we cannot go away with principles of Shariah. We cannot go away with the Shariah because Islamic finance is Shariah principles. Okay? Now, in the Malaysian context, we have the law who, okay, in addition of the fact that Islamic finance and Shariah is one just now, but the law also mentioned clearly that when we do Islamic financial business, we must be consistent with the principles of Shariah. Okay, and these are the law that already clearly mentioned. Okay, so means that not only fundamentally when we talk about Islamic finance, it is part of the Shariah, but the law also clearly mentioned that when you do Islamic finance, either under Bank Negara, Central Bank Act, Central Bank means that banking and takaful, and development financial institutions, which is under CBA, okay, which is under Central Bank of Malaysia. So when you do Islamic financial business, it must be consistent with Shariah. Now, capital market also says that when you do Islamic capital market activities, it must be consistent with the principle of Shariah as well. And even if you are doing the offshore related business, Labuan Islamic Financial Services Act also talking about when you do any Islamic offshore business, Islamic financial offshore business, it must also comply with the principles of Sharia. Right? So basically, when you are in Malaysia, when we talk about Malaysian context, either you are doing under Bank Negara, either you are doing under Capital Market Securities Commission, or you are doing under Labuan Offshore, all law, these main regulatory, these are the three regulatory authority on Islamic finance in Malaysia, stated or provide the clear provisions, okay, that everything that you do on Islamic finance must be compliant with the principles of Sharia. So, okay, what is the advantage? What is the pro and cons, I would say, when we have the provisions of law? Number one, to people like me who say that, well, this is good because there's no other way without having it in the Sharia way. Right? It has to be in a Sharia compliant manner. But it may also, however, the implication is that if you don't comply with the law, then you will be subject to certain penalty. Okay? Because when it is in the form of law, then it is subject to certain penalty, enforcement of law, and whatnot. Okay, the penalty can be in different form. It can be penal. It can be what we call it fine. It can be also, ISA also talks about imprisonment and so on and so forth. Yeah. So we are looking at when having it in the form of law, okay, it is a must for us to do. If you don't do, subject to certain penalty. Now, our first proposition that when we talk about Islamic finance is part of Sharia, that one, okay, the penalty is in the form of the point that I did mention earlier. Well, you know, you will be sinful kind of thing. That is the religious part of it. But in the context of law, we are looking at the implication that whereby, you know, certain penalty will be imposed against those who do not comply with the principles of Sharia. Okay, IFSA, as of you know, everyone know that when it was introduced 2013, there was a big, what we call it, no, if I were to say, it was a big thing actually globally. Why I'm saying globally? Because when IFSA was introduced, we are the first who have the law in such a manner talking about a very comprehensive perspective on Sharia compliance. Okay, not only that, we put the duty, okay, the law clearly mentioned that the duty of the Islamic financial institution to ensure everything Sharia compliant. We also put what are here, for example, you must have a rigorous, what are the functions that you must have? The board and everyone must be having their functions to ensure that you are doing good in terms of the Sharia compliance. So this is the governance part of it, the reporting, okay, the reporting part of it, okay, and also, sorry, I'm not sure it's, yeah, also talking about the penalty. So when we first started, when we started having IFSA and then start talking about IFSA, okay, of course, IFSA was established for the very objective, which is stated in section 6. The principal regulatory objective of IFSA are to promote financial stability and compliance with Sharia. Of course, financial stability will be the first priority, okay? And number 2 is that compliance with Sharia. And thus, no wonder, it is not a surprise for us when IFSA, when it was introduced, there's a lot of focus, emphasis on the Sharia compliance. Okay, and if then not only that, you must have the governance process, you must have your checking in terms of Sharia compliant. Everyone need to be doing what they're supposed to be doing, basically. Yeah? So these are the organs on the governance and whatnot. You need to report whether you are compliant or not. Okay, and if you fail to ensure Sharia compliance, then you will be subject to certain penalty. Yep. So the first thing ever that I always what we call it now, the penalty, whether in the form of 25 million ringgit Malaysia for Sharia non-failure in terms of ensuring Sharia compliance, or or I would say you know, 8 years imprisonment. Yep. Okay. Now, what we need to be doing, this is provided, but my point here is that not to go into detail, but talking about what is the position of the law in the country, talking about Sharia compliance. If some talks about full Islamic bank, full or licensed Islamic bank, where the bank or financial institution start off as an Islamic institution, either takaful company or either an Islamic bank, or either DFI as a DFI, okay, but they, of course, for DFI, they are subject to Development Financial Institution Act. So when they got the license as an Islamic financial institution, they must be doing everything Sharia compliant manner. Okay, but in addition to that, for those non-licensed, I mean that, for the Islamic banks or Islamic financial institution, or what we call it, for the conventional bank, okay, sorry, for the conventional bank who do not hold as, of course, they are licensed as a conventional bank, but the requirement, if they want to do, they want to offer Islamic banking products and services, they need to get approval from Bank Negara Malaysia. Okay? And approval, once they got the approval, then they can offer Islamic banking. The law also provides that the do's and don'ts for them in ensuring Shariah compliance. Okay, so this is provided in FSA, Financial Services Act. Okay, so Financial Services Act talk about conventional financial institution that gets approval from Bank Negara to offer product and services on Islamic banking and finance. There are things that they need to be doing. Okay? They must ensure, of course, you need to get your board of directors consent. There must be allocation of capital that is allocated to Islamic. And that asset and that allocated portion must always be utilized for Islamic. It cannot be kind of, flow over there, flow conventional. No, you need to identify 500 million, for example, is the amount that approved by your board of directors to be used for Islamic. So it has to be kept as an Islamic fund. You cannot, for example, oh, I just take it from all your conventional fund. No, it has to be segregated. And this fund has to be put in if you want to put it in, for example, in any account, any deposit account, it has to be placed in an Islamic account. So your 500 million that you have identified, which is to be allocated for Islamic banking business, has to be placed in an Islamic account. The utilization of the money shall always be for Islamic banking business. Yeah, it cannot be, okay, put in your plunged back in your conventional account. Cannot be. So for window, the challenge is that you are having two basically separate accounts, reporting also two separate reporting, because you need to report your Islamic business. Yeah, you need to report your Islamic business. You of course have your group business, okay, your conventional business, but you must have a specific Islamic business report. Yeah, okay, and then you need to have your Shariah committee as well. You need to have your Shariah governance process in place. You need to do your Shariah review. You need to Shariah audit and so on and so forth. So actually, having it operation under the Islamic window concept is very challenging, because it's very thin line just now. So your Shariah governance must be intact, so that there is no, for example, flow of the fund from Islamic to conventional. That is no, it must be different. It must be segregated clearly. Yeah. Okay. So this is what the position of the law is. Then, of course, this is what we call it IFSA back again as regards to the requirement on Shariah compliance. Section 30 and 36 talking about the Shariah governance. Okay, that Islamic banks, Islamic financial institution must appoint the Shariah committee members. It's also stated about the duties of the Shariah committee members and few other related matters on the Shariah committee. Yeah. Then third item is section 37 and 38 talking about audit on Shariah compliance. So not only that we have Shariah audit function under the Shariah governance here, okay, but audit section 37, 38 talks about if the need require, okay, if the need be, then Bank Negara may ask the banks or takaful company or any financial institution, Islamic financial institution, to appoint external Shariah auditor for them. Yeah. So basically, when we talk about audit or Shariah audit, we have actually section 37, 38 talks about external audit, whereby Bank Negara may ask the bank, says that, okay, please take external Shariah audit. What would be the situation of which Bank Negara require them to do so, the institution to do so? Maybe the internal capacity is not sufficient. Yeah, the bank okay, may have some issue with their Shariah auditor in terms of competency, in terms of whatever it is and whatnot. Thus, the need of having external Shariah audit. Yeah. So that is on section 37 and 38. Okay. And as did mention about the penalties. Okay, so penalties that if non-compliance on the imprisonment of 8 years, fine of 25 million or both. And of course, okay, in addition to that, Bank Negara also have the right to do the necessary, being the regulator, to either investigate or take the administrative action, impose monetary penalty, taking civil action in court to compound, and to even publish information regarding any event, any activity, any organization that have been doing wrong, basically. Yeah. So I'm putting this into the perspectives. These penalties is more on section 28. Powers of BNM, I can't remember exactly the section 200 something in IFSA, what we call it, okay, talking about, and also some of it in Central Bank Act in terms of the powers of Bank Negara to ensure that everything complies with the principles of Sharia. Okay. I am good as of now. Am I doing good? Yeah. Anyone? Anyone would like to give some updates or any? Okay.
Doctor, just to
Yes,
one
please.
issue, Doctor.
Yeah.
My concern with regards to the non-compliance, Doctor was
Mhm.
emphasizing the issue on the dating and the timing and the date of the agreement, which is
Yeah.
crucial. It's a
Yeah.
mandatory this thing.
Yeah.
What will be the consequence on the lawyer? For example, a law firm who has been assigned to do that document.
Uh-huh.
Of course, when you say that the banks have overlooked on that, and what will be the repercussion on the law firm itself? The person who's entrusted to do that document, omitting that date and time. Can I know that, Doctor?
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. Should I address you, Mr.
Lechimanan, Doctor.
Lechiman? Okay, Lechiman. Okay. Then, okay. Now, of course, the good thing is that lawyers is always good at handling matters lah. You are not parties to the contract, of course, but you are just helping the banks and the parties to execute the contract, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so we are excluded from the, but I believe it is more on banks hiring you, okay, to be their panel, okay, because of course banks are not doing, bank definitely cannot be doing execution of the contracts on their own, yeah.
Yes, of course.
So that's why they what we call it, outsource it to the panel lawyers. Now, if you are not performing, if you are not good at that, they will say that, well, yeah, you'll not be in panel anymore, if I were to say that. Yeah. As of now, I'm not sure. However, if you have a specific contract, for example, with the bank, which then there could be something that you need to be paying some kind of compensation and whatnot. That one I'm not sure. What I know of is more on bringing you in as their panel, or if your performance is not good, then they say that, thank you very much.
The review part, on the review part, Doctor, yes.
On the review part?
I mean, whatever, on the periodical review of
Yeah.
the bank, the panel's performance.
Yes, yes. So the good thing about being the legal law firm is that the legal what we call it is that we normally stand directed by the financial institution. What should we need to be doing and whatnot. Normally, we always make when we say that banks always provide you some kind of guidance that in terms of things that you need to be doing, because Bank A, Afin Bank way of doing murabah, or what we call it musyarakah mutanakisah, is different than Maybank doing musyarakah mutanakisah. So we always stand guided by the instruction from the bank. from the bank side, because I'm also the Shariah committee of the bank, we always make a point that to make sure that the guidance or the instruction is very clear.
Yes.
Yeah, because again, to avoid such a situation that we mentioned earlier. Yeah. Now, it could be, however, Mr. Leche, is that the frustration sometimes, where we expect that you're supposed to know, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. So the expectation of the lawyers to understand the subject matter, and I believe that some of the bank or many banks now start putting the requirement. You want to be empaneled, then you need to show, or you need to show basically your understanding of Islamic finance, and then what kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So they ask you, for example, to attend some training courses, certificates, and so on and so forth. It could be. I heard about that. That people, I mean, that colleague of mine is always, of course, I'm from law. I'm from law. Yeah, so that's why. So friends and whatnot, I start talking about where can I get the training, because or else they okay, that's good actually, because that is a push for the lawyer to understand what are we doing basically, right?
Yes,
Because, so that's one. And some of the bank even have your internal training kind of thing, where they group all the panel member and start having the training. They also, some of the banks are also doing that. Or or else you can see that your name will not be listed anymore. Yeah. So I think that's good. That's what, no implication. I don't find anywhere so far the practice that implicate lawyers for wrong execution and whatnot, because the contract is very clear between bank and the customer. Yeah. Okay. So we are good on that, right?
Yeah, doctor has also put forth the components of this Islamic this thing, especially on the morality, the worship and the morality of it. That sounds interesting, if you're looking at it, as opposed to the conventional laws. We are more interested and driven by the issue of interest, as opposed to Islamic this thing where we are talking about morality. You're not supposed to earn more or unlawful gains and all whatsoever. I'm quite distinct with this issue of this morality, doctor.
Again, Mr. Leche, is that we as a human, at the end of the day, right? Even though we love money, we love wealth, but at the end of the day, when we really go to deep down, that we say that, am I doing good for humanity? Right. So I think this is where the question is basically. So in Islamic finance, as I did mention, when the rule of thumb is simple in Islamic finance, when you are rich, you must share your wealth to others. Now, what we call it, must means that there are two ways. One is there are certain portion of money of your wealth that you must give away as zakat. We have heard of zakat, right? Zakat is a mandatory requirement. Bank cannot say, I don't want to give zakat. No, cannot. When you reach that level, when you have some amount of money, there are certain requirements, certain amount of money that you get, then you must give. You must give. If you don't give, non-compliance to Sharia, and based on the law, non-compliant to the law as well, because you don't behave like you are. Okay. Number two is that this is the obligatory one. The second is that you are always highly recommended to give, not the compulsory one, but to give the sedekah. You know sedekah, right? So how the sedekah from Islamic finance perspective is done? Now we have CSR. First is CSR. CSR from Sharia wise is not compulsory. Yeah. But from governance side, of course, CSR is something that if you don't do, okay, so that could be. But from the Sharia side, so if, for example, would that be okay for an Islamic bank not to do the CSR activities? The answer to that is yes. But they are doing that because that always the good governance, best practice and whatnot. So the compulsory they give, the recommendation also they give. Number 3, now industry are talking about social finance. Social finance. Now, how then Islamic finance help out to the B40, for example, right? Now we find takaful policy, what I am always, is that now where they embrace this B40 are not excluded anymore now. Previously, you can only get insurance coverage or even takaful coverage if you have certain amount of money because you need to pay the premium. And most of the B40, they cannot pay because you're talking about 100 a month, for example, right? Or maybe less if you are very young still, for example. But this B40 don't even have money for their food. They don't think about insurance. They don't think about takaful. Because to them, putting the food in the mouth of their children are much, much more. So, but these are the most, I would say, fragile or most, that exposed to risk. When the mother died, when the father died, 6 children, no school. Why? No money. No money, no food and whatnot. So actually, this B40 need a lot of takaful. They need to be helped. So what we do? Then takaful, okay, now you may find the product for B40 of which B40 only pay 5 ringgit. 5 ringgit for the policy a year, for a year. Of course, 5 ringgit you cannot get lah 1 million. Protection. They get only 20,000. But to them, 20,000 is 2 million for us maybe. Because 20 million is the only money. If the father died, they get the money. I've seen that. I have been involved in that and I see, wow, this is very good, very noble. So we would like to see that the same also to be reflected or replicated in conventional insurance and whatnot. Okay, so hopefully we will be doing that together. So this is what some example of, of what ethic and morality just now. Other than, of course, the environmental sustainability, ESG kind of thing. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for insight.
Okay. Thank you very much. So let's move. It's already 11. Okay. Now Shariah. Now let's move to the third part is that Shariah governance. Now this is the definition on Shariah governance by FSB. It is a system that in that institution. Now what is important, and if I were to read, Sharia governance system is a set of institutional and organizational arrangement through which Islamic financial institutions ensure that there is an effective independent oversight of Sharia compliance over the issuance of relevant Sharia pronouncement, dissemination of information, and internal Sharia compliance review. Now, what triggered me from this definition is that Sharia governance cannot be done without having the full support of all institutions, of the institution in that institution. It cannot be board of directors said this, but senior management said the other, and the staff said different thing, or the Sharia committee said different thing. So everyone must be talking to one another. Everyone must understand that this is what we are doing for the Islamic bank or Islamic financial institution. It cannot be effective and efficient if the company do not set a clear Sharia governance policy, Sharia governance framework in the institution itself. Yeah? And it must be top down. It must be, you need to get support from everyone. Everyone need to be, again, I use always the word that I always love is that you need to be talking to one another. Board need to be talking to the Shariah committee. Shariah committee need to be talking. So then we understand one another. Yep. Okay. And the purpose of this Shariah governance, as I mentioned several times, many times just now, is that to ensure Shariah compliance. Okay. The last part is actually more on the processes. It states some of the processes under the Shariah governance that we must be doing. Shariah pronouncement. Who give the Shariah pronouncement? The Shariah committee. Now, if Sir said just now, Shariah IFI must appoint Shariah committee. So these are the Shariah committee. They need to provide the pronouncement. Now, that pronouncement need to be disseminated to the departments in the bank. Example, yeah, the Shariah committee who says, Mr. Lechi, if I were to relate Mr. Lechi just now, that Shariah committee said that must be dated, the document must be dated, must be timed. That is the instruction from the Shariah committee, the Shariah pronouncement. It has to be cascade down, it has to be communicated to legal department. The legal department need to disseminate the information to the panel member, to the panel lawyer, right? So
Yes.
this is what dissemination of information is all about. If I were to give an example. Another example, right? You know, Shariah committee said that execution, okay, this is talking about, for example, we always talk about normally for, you know, for example, in Shariah committee said, no business, we must not provide financing for tobacco-based, right? Then this decision need to be communicated to business, right?
Yes.
Business need to know. Huh? Business need to ensure that their manager or their person who are dealing with the client and whatnot know about this. Okay. And of course, review is one of the very important function as well. Because as I mentioned earlier, review is the function that do the checking. From time to time, okay, on a continuous basis, whether are we doing it right or not. Okay, Shariah review will be checking whether the bank has the Shariah pronouncement. Do they have the Shariah pronouncement? And then it is disseminated, everyone knows about it, and everyone is executing it well. So that is where the review function is all about. Yeah. Okay. These are the key components. You need to have the regulation. In our case, on Shariah governance, we have Shariah governance policy document. And each of the bank have their own Shariah policy, Shariah governance policy. You need to have the key organs. Who are the key organs on Shariah governance? The main organs are Board of Director, Shariah Committee, as well as the management. And each of them have their duties and accountabilities. They must be qualified, they must be competent. If you are not competent, if you are not qualified, then you might not be giving a good decision. The process must be robust, must be effective, must be transparent. Okay? And the disclosure on the Shariah governance need to be made in the companies or in the Islamic banks annual report or Islamic companies or Takaful companies annual report for transparency. In Malaysia, this is our Shariah governance approach or model. We have two Shariah body that look after Shariah matters or Shariah related matters. Shariah Advisory Council at Bank Negara level. Okay, actually not only Bank Negara, but also at the Securities Commission and also at Labuan. Yeah, so there are three SAC at the regulatory level. And their decision, okay, what they are actually, what we call it, appointment, their role, duty, and whatnot are provided in the Central Bank Act 2009. and they are considered, or they are under the law, is the highest authority to decide or to ascertain Islamic finance matters, Shariah matters in Islamic finance. And they come out with their pronouncement. These are the Shariah resolutions. Okay, so they come out with the pronouncement as well. Okay, so that pronouncement is, you can find the pronouncement of SAC of Bank Negara in the Bank Negara website. Okay, you can easily find it. And most of the Shariah resolutions or Shariah decision by the SAC is already been translated into the policies that Bank Negara issued. Okay. Now, this is at the central level, at the national level. Number two here is the Shariah governance at the industry level, at the IFI, at the banks, where we have the board of director, management, as well as the Shariah committee here. The one who take care of the Shariah is the Shariah committee. But board of director and management, are they not looking after the Shariah committee? We cannot say that. Yes, they are actually also accountable. So the three body, the three organ here, Shariah committee, board of directors, and management work together to ensure that Shariah compliance are intact in the Islamic bank, in the organization, sorry. And these organs are supported by the Shariah compliance functions or Shariah control functions. Shariah review, audit, risk management, as well as the secretariat. Okay, and what are the main documents supporting them or put their key roles and whatnot? We have IFSA, and we have also Shariah on operational standards issued by Bank Negara Malaysia. Yeah? So in terms of the Shariah governance, of course, we have Shariah governance policy document that have been issued by Bank Negara in 2019. So these are basically a simple or the overview of our or the Malaysian Shariah governance approach or Shariah governance framework for Islamic finance industry. Yeah, and then of course, the decision of SAC is binding, or Bank Negara is binding. Court must also, it is binding on the court, and it is also binding on the arbitrator. Yeah, okay. So there's a case law on this, but today is not the session, of course, but that case law on this stated clearly that the decision of SAC of Bank Negara as regards to the Shariah matters are binding. Court has no right to say otherwise. Okay, rather than what court and arbitrator should do is to ensure to apply the principles or the decision by the SAC in the context of the cases at hand, that they are talking about, or they are bringing, or they are discussing. Okay, now this is Shariah Governance Policy 2019 that have been issued, what we call it, in 2019. And this Shariah Governance Policy supersedes Shariah Governance Framework 2010. I did mention earlier that our Shariah Governance Framework 2010 was the first model that we established not only in Malaysia but also globally, and that was also the model that have been adopted everywhere across the globe. Everywhere you can find the same. Okay, in for sure that if I can name a few. We have Maldives just did it, Shariah governance. Maldives, I think last 2 years. Brunei, we have Oman, Bahrain, many other countries follow our Shariah governance framework. But on Malaysian, in our case, we have supersede that, and then we have new one, SGPD, Shariah Governance Policy Document, and pursuant that it was issued pursuant to IFSA and DAFIA because it is also applicable to Islamic banks, to takaful company, to licensed banks, investment bank, DFIs, okay, as well as the Shariah committee members. Yeah. Okay. Now, what's new in SGP and SGPD 2019? In SGP in Shariah governance framework previously, there is no tenure in terms of limitation in terms of tenure of Shariah committee's appointment, but now it is limited to 9 years. Shariah committee cannot be politician, okay, and chairman have to play the role, very active role, chairman of the Shariah committee. Interestingly, Shariah review function, which under SGF 2010, it was placed under Shariah committee. Previously, Shariah review was under directly reporting to the Shariah committee. But for enhancement of Shariah governance, what we call it practice and exercise, SGP 2019 placed Shariah review under compliance, which is rightly it is much better because the purpose of Shariah review is to ensure compliance. Okay, and there are a few other things. Okay, these are key areas. Of course, I'm not going to go through one by one. That will be something for your reference later on. But point of that we need to be take into consideration that SGPD talking about accountability of board, Shariah committee, as well as the control function, internal control functions. Okay, and the key organs for Shariah governance are board of directors, Shariah committee, as well as the senior management. What is expected from Bank Negara, by Bank Negara? Oh, sorry, not Takaful company, but for IFI here. Sorry for this mistake. That we need to be ensuring that our governance, our Shariah governance are good and effective, depending on your business, complexity of your business. What I'm saying here, for example, small banks may have only, less than 5, what we call it, Shariah governance, I would say, or Shariah offices, for example. But big bank may have a department consisting of 20, 30 and whatnot, right? So depending on the complexity of your business, yeah. And you must have, Islamic banks must provide evidence. They must show that they have good Shariah governance, Shariah compliance culture. Okay, so they have to prove that to Bank Negara. And last but not least is that Shariah, the board, Shariah committee, and senior management must play an active role in terms of the Shariah governance. Okay, okay, that is basically on the Shariah governance. Okay, are we cool as of now?
Yes, Doctor, yes.
Okay, shall we continue a bit more? We have half an hour. Okay, and then
Continue.
yeah, okay. Now this, let's move on to the last part of it, that is on the Shariah control functions, which is provided under Shariah governance policy 2019. Yeah. Now, in the document of SGPD, SGP, some said SGP, some said SGPD, I'm just using interchangeably, but I'm referring to the Shariah governance policy 2019. Yeah. Now, one of the purpose of the SGP, one of the aspect of SGP is that to ensure that, we manage, and all banks manage Shariah non-compliance or Shariah, because we want to ensure that there is no non-compliance, right? Because the rule of thumb that we must comply with Shariah. So what we need to manage is that we need to ensure that if possible, zero SNC. When I say SNC, Shariah non-compliant to happen. Yeah. Now, how to ensure that this is effectively managed? What are the governance process that we need to be having to ensure that we have zero SNC? Yeah, we have zero SNC. Now, so these are the control function that Bank Negara said that every bank, every IFI must have. You must have Shariah risk management, you must have Shariah review, and you must have Shariah audit. Okay, these are the very, very important function as regards to the Shariah assurance just now, or Shariah compliance just now. Okay, now, Shariah risk management. The Shariah risk management is to look into, to basically make an assessment and monitor, okay, whether what are, for example, I'm just putting the perspective that they need to count what are the areas, they need to do the assessment, what are the weaknesses that happen in the bank, in the Islamic financial institution that are prone to SNC. And they need to come up with the measures on how we can fill in the gap, or we can, you know, top up, we can enhance that area, basically. Example, if the issue of, for example, you know, the business department do not understand, they do not, example, we give example that the pronouncement need to be communicated to the business unit or the business department so they understand, okay? So then the business unit, however, or the business department having some issue, they don't understand what to do. So Shariah risk management will be doing this assessment. Which are the gap, which are the area, and whatnot. The issue could be communication. The issue could be process related. The issue could be talent, or the, what we call it, capacity or competency related. Okay? So this is the role of Shariah risk management. Shariah risk management will look into the overall business operation and identify which are the areas that need to be enhanced, what are the areas that prone to the SNC, okay? So that we can say that, oh, no SNC. So from the very beginning, it's already been, what we call it, nak kata apa eh? What's the words? I can't find the words now. You know, you don't want to have an SNC, so it's already been mitigated at the beginning already. Yeah. Now it could be operational lapse. Operational lapse means that some processes that need to be enhanced. Okay. Now Shariah review is, again, point is to do the assessment on the Shariah compliance aspect of it. And as we know that just now, we give example that Shariah compliance will come from the Shariah committee decision, resolutions, and whatnot. How is it implemented? How is it executed at the bank's level? So Shariah review will be checking that, whether it is done in a good manner or otherwise. Okay? Again, to ensure no SNC. Now, Shariah audit are much bigger, because Shariah audit not only look into the Shariah aspects, but it could be the governance aspect. Example, oh, maybe some issues in terms of the management. Management are not, you know, people are talking, this is the way the company should be doing. But the management is saying that, no, I want you to do it a different way. So this is the area that normally the Shariah audit will be looking at. So Shariah audit also may highlight issues of lack of training, competency, for example. So these three functions have to be working together in a way, okay? Working together, because when you identify, how do you know that it is a competence issue? Then, you know, this is from the Shariah risk management. They may be doing that. And it has to be highlighted to the Shariah audit to confirm whether is it a competence issue? Is it operational issues? Or is it, what kind of issue is this? So audit will be looking into that matter and bring it back, okay, to the board of audit committee. They bring it back to the audit committee and later on to the board of directors for them to rectify the measures. Of course, audit are normally placed in the audit department. Okay, there are two modes of doing this. Basically, some have a dedicated Shariah audit team. Some banks have a Shariah auditor themselves. The other, however, they have audit department. Okay, and everyone, for example, or a group of the people will be given tasks in addition of the normal audit, the business audit, IT audit, and whatnot. Okay, they also do the Shariah part of it. So I found that in the market, in the practice as of now, there are two approaches of the bank. Some they have a dedicated Shariah audit team or Shariah auditor. The other, however, all or majority or a group of auditors in the bank are identified to play the role as a Shariah auditor or to perform the Shariah audit function. Yeah? But for Shariah review, the law stated, the Shariah governance policy stated that it must be a dedicated team. Yeah? Because they are doing a Shariah review per se. The requirement of Shariah or the Shariah review that you must have a good knowledge on Islamic. You must be a qualified Shariah, what we call it, from Shariah, and also must have a good knowledge on Shariah. This is risk management. Okay, what I did mention earlier. Okay, they need to establish, they need to identify what are the Shariah risks and whatnot. Okay, they come up with their role in terms of their list, for example, checklist of whatnot. So again, we are talking about the what we call it, monitoring, mitigating to ensure that there is no SNC. Now, Shariah review, they identify, monitor, except in terms of the Shariah compliance aspect. Okay, they are not looking into, for example, other things, for example, IT related matters, unless if it is related to Shariah. If it is not, they are very focused on the Shariah aspects of it. They report to the board, Shariah committee, and senior management on any findings. They report directly to the Shariah committee first. They report to the Shariah committee. Shariah committee will identify, will confirm whether that incident, the findings is Shariah non-compliant or otherwise. Okay, so the role, the process is that the Shariah, what we call it, review team made the finding. The finding will be tabled to the Shariah committee. Shariah committee will decide whether it is Shariah non-compliant or otherwise. And it has to be reported to Bank Negara. Okay, and we must come out with the rectification on such a thing. If I were to give example earlier, when there is the contract which is non-compliant due to non-dated and then no timing on that, okay, so the rectification is whereby it has to be channeled to charity. It has to be what we call it, confirmed by the Shariah committee. Okay, Shariah review officers must be Shariah qualified. You must have a Shariah qualification, and it has to be head or led by a senior officer accountable for compliance. Okay? So then normally the structure is that you have a compliance, what we call it, head of compliance, and then it could be also what we call it, under the head of compliance, it could be someone who is dealing on Shariah review. Okay, because Shariah review is again belongs to the compliance department. And one of the very important aspects, okay, one of the very interesting, what we call it, aspect of the role of Shariah review is that they must give the updates to the board, to the Shariah committee, to the senior management on any latest developments in the legal and regulatory requirements. Means that if there is any new thing or new policy issued by Bank Negara relating to Shariah, then they must update the board, the Shariah committee, and the senior management. Yeah. So means that, okay, the Shariah is always good for the Shariah review officers here to have a bit of the background on legal. At least they know what is legal, what is law, what need to be highlighted, and so on and so forth. Yeah. and also to ensure that adequate training and guidance are provided to in the banks, because they must ensure they give the proposal, not that they are the one who provide the training. Yeah, they are not they are not the what we call it, the staff who provide the training, but they identify what are the area that you know, the employee or the staff need to know about the Islamic finance, and they must arrange, they must put in the findings. Okay, yeah? So that's why it's quite normal for the Shariah review team to do the assessment on staff awareness on Islamic finance. The logic tells that when you are in Islamic bank, you know about Islamic finance, right? Because that's what you are doing on daily basis. But it may not be so. Yeah? So Shariah review then will be one of the exercise, could be in the form of, okay, I give you some kind of quizzes, some kind of whatever it is, for you to test whether you understand this or not. And if the need be, then if, for example, okay, passing mark is 50, you got only 30%. So then they will recommend that, okay, you need to go for training. They will be communicating to management. Okay, so the management then will go to HR and whatnot. Okay? But these are more on, they will not be asking the quizzes on business. No. They will be asking question on Shariah and Islamic finance, the product that they are offering, and so on and so forth. Yeah? Because their scope is very much Shariah based. Okay. Shariah audit is much wider. Okay. Why it is wider? Because they are the assessor. They make assessment for the overall business operation. Rather than review just now, the scope is very focused on Shariah matters. Specifically on how or whether the banks or IFI, Takaful company, and know about the pronouncement by the Shariah committee, disseminate it, execute it in the right way. So that is basically the function of the Shariah review. Audit are much bigger. It can go to, for example, other things. Yeah? Communication is not good. Competence are normally come under the Shariah audit. Okay. And maybe they can also, Shariah audit can also do the assessment in terms of capacity or competence of Shariah reviewer, for example. Okay? So that can be done by the Shariah audit. Okay. Now, these are basically the overall in terms of the requirement on the Shariah control function just now. They must be effective and efficient. They must be competent. They must have access to information. Review and audit are, you know, they are doing job which is quite similar. The scope, however, are different. They must be given access to certain or to the documents that, you know, within their scope. They cannot be denied that. When they request the, what we call it, the information, it has to be submitted for them to make the evaluation. And they must be making an independent assessment. For what purpose? To ensure that it is no SNC. It is not NSC. And they must have sufficient resources. Then this is very much what we call it related to when we look into the definition earlier, depending on the business. If, for example, your small company and whatnot, maybe 2 or several will be okay. But what we call it, a headcount will be okay. But to much more complex, big, for example, company and whatnot, of course, we're talking about 10, 20 and whatnot. Okay? More resources, more headcounts are required. Okay. Last but not least, I would like to share a bit of the what we are, what we call it, having here. Then what we call it, these are some issues that generally the study have been, we found that There are some issues generally that we face in this industry that issues of competence, expertise, and qualifications in Shariah are the most prevailing issues that we face for review and audit. Yeah, not to say that maybe you may have in the banks or in Islamic, in Takaful company, a very good and competent reviewer, but industry as a whole still lack that. So that's why you may find that a competent, a good one will be sought after, So that's why the volatility of this Shariah officer actually, you know, because normally it's not something that is what we call it strange. If I were to say I meet this what we call it Shariah reviewer or Shariah auditor in one bank, after the second time I say, are you still there? Are you still in that bank? So I think legal practitioners are much better, much more what we call it loyal in one firm and whatnot, but they are not. After 2-3 years, you know, especially the young one, they move to some other place because better promotion, better and whatnot. Because the fact that we need more of this competent expertise and qualified reviewer and auditor. Okay? And number 2 is that it's more on internal that what we call it process and approach that some of the do we have a good, the question is that do we have a good framework internally? We don't question on Shariah governance policy because it's already there, Bank Negara is already having it there. But how are we interpreting or translating the Shariah governance policy into the respective banks and the respective takaful company? So you need to have a good, robust, okay? If I were to see, if I were to use more, what we call it, you must have a very agile working condition, working environment, framework and whatnot, so that it can be a good source of reference. It can be, so these are things that need basically internal, what we call it, policies on audit and review, okay, which acknowledge and recognize, not only empower, but also acknowledge and recognize and the independence of this body, of this reviewer and what we call it auditor, because they should be telling the truth. Yeah, let's say in their findings, oh, it happened that one of the guy thought that senior management is not doing it good. They have to be telling it to the truth, right? So this is the difficult part of it. But they are reporting to, you know, the bosses, but the bosses says that, oh, you changed this, I don't want this. So we need to acknowledge that they are independent. Why is it so? Okay, because if it is encroached, if the independence is encroached, you or the bank will be exposed to much higher risk, of which, for example, findings of Shariah review or Shariah audit said that, oh, this is SNC, Shariah non-compliant. Boss may not be happy. Why? Because the company policy is 0 SNC. When you report there is SNC, then you know you are not following the company's policy. One, it may affect your bonus, it may affect whatever it is, your performance and whatnot. So they're not happy. So they say, make sure review, audit, no SNC. Even though review and audit findings is that actually it is SNC. But because of that, so there's always push that. There's always some kind of, you know, I would say the clash of which whether, so the governance says that they must be independent. If it is SNC, bring it to the Shariah committee members. Shariah committee will decide whether it is actual or not. If SNC said, if Shariah committee said that it is SNC, then let it be. Yeah. Okay. So these have to be. I mean that if I were to put this, you know, in this context of the issues that we face, yes. Okay. And of course, issues in terms of, you know, the way, because not only audit, not only review, not only, but the whole banking system are very much based on the conventional framework. And thus, we are always streamlined. We do not understand, should we do that? Should we do that? The conventional framework policies are very much good, what we call it, you know, comprehensive and whatnot. So therefore, we tend to bring it in the perspective of conventional. Yeah. Then, of course, some would also expect that Bank Negara come out with detail in terms of provide the guidelines. But I'm a bit, this is actually the research that conducted on review and audit across the industry. And these are basically some of the findings that I am sharing with you. Okay. Then I think last but not least, these are the challenges as well. Okay. This is from the research as well on that we find that it's very difficult to get the talent. Okay. Board are there, board may know about performance. Board are very effective in ensuring good profit, and I mean that all the policies relating to business and whatnot, but board may not be very comfortable yet, yeah, as regards to the Shariah governance. Yeah. And talent is an issue as well. Talent is an issue. And you know, Mr. Lecce mentioned about moral and ethics and integrity. It's very difficult to legislate integrity. Maybe impossible, I would say, I do not know, but that's, you know, it's very, very hard, difficult. Integrity and ethics. There's always people who say that, oh, you know, so, well, that's another big challenge that we are facing. Yep. Okay. Moving forward, what we call it, Sharia governance policy talks about Sharia compliance culture. Now, I put it into the perspective, my narrative is that despite the challenge that we face, despite the challenge of legislating ethics and integrity, yeah, because when we talk about Sharia non-compliant, Sharia, we need to be doing it good. But there's always ways and means for us or for people who kind of not reporting it, put it under carpet kind of thing. Yeah. Hopefully it will not be happening because we don't want that to happen. And the best way is to imbue in the culture within you. Yeah. When we say culture, it's beyond legislation. It's beyond policy. Culture is for us to act it voluntarily. Culture is for us to respond it without thinking, right? Culture during Ramadan is that supposed to be no training. Because I cannot drink. No, I'm just joking, yeah, everyone. But that's the culture. Okay? That we are looking at the compliance become the culture for the institution, and the institution consists of the people, of the employee, of the staff. If everyone instill this culture, that if I have come across something that is non-compliant, then I need to be reporting it. There's no need for me to put it under carpet, to put it under the carpet. No. Okay. Put it on the table. Let's discuss it. Take up the spirit. But to ensure that you or this guy have that kind of culture, that kind of brave, you know, brevity, I would say, the management also must be open up. That if there is anything, come to me. Let me know. Let's discuss things together. But if the management and the bosses is saying that, do never come to me, that would be a different scenario. So means that my last point here is that, you know, when we have this culture become part of us, we are not talking about integrity, morality, and whatnot. Sharia compliance is actually the same thing. We are doing it because it is part of the way how it should be. Yep. So of course, there could be at one point of time some stick and whatnot need to be used, but the best ever thing, the best ever way is that to imbue it as a good culture of ourselves, right? I think this Sharia culture is also provided in Sharia governance policy document. Okay, my last one. Well, I think we are good on this. Thank you very much. 2 hours talking. And no water. Alhamdulillah. Okay, any question, everyone? I can stop this.
I was very happy, Doctor, on the manner in which it was presented today. Quite interesting to follow through, and hope to have a few more with the doctor, with time to come.
Ahlan, welcome.
Thank you for the insight.
Not Ramadan lah, not puasa. Not puasa.
Yeah, after the puasa.
After.
Maybe we will have more questions to post to doctor, maybe another session, and not in this session, maybe after the puasa.
Thank you. There's a question here. Let me see. Azizuddin, Cik Azizuddin, Cik Azizuddin is a Sharia auditor and would like to ask question: what if the Sharia pronouncement on the same subject matter are noted to be different for different IFIs, which was probably due to the different operating environment of IFIs? Okay. Is there any Sharia governance or compliance issue when an Islamic bank receive additional capital injection from its conventional parent bank? Cik Azizuddin, the first question, if I understand it, that the decision, the Sharia decision from one bank and the other bank is different, right? Okay. I think the rule in our in Sharia governance, what we call it in Malaysia, is that SAC decision is binding on us. We shouldn't be going against the SAC. We shouldn't be having any, that because it is the binding one. So we follow the SAC decision. We have no right whatsoever from the law to decide other than the decision of SAC. For example, Bai'ul Inna or Murabaha is permissible. And then we are saying, no, to us it's not permissible. No. There is no such thing. But, so on that manner, on that matter, on the permissibility of musyarakah, permissibility of tawarruk, for example, SAC made the decision that it is permissible. None of us can say that tawarruk is not permissible. No. Okay. But, okay, each of the bank Sharia committee, each of the bank of the Sharia committee, remember, that may decide, okay, that in this bank, okay, what we call it, our deposit based on tawarruk, single tawarruk, single agent. The other bank, Sharia committee say, oh, it should be dual tawarruk. Yeah. So implementation of the SAC decision, it can be variation. Variation means that just now, but still within that, you cannot be doing something that is against the Sharia. But SAC decision, tawarruk is okay. Tawarruk can be single agency. It can be double agency. So Sharia Committee Bank A said that for our deposit product, we are using single agency tawarruk. Bank B Sharia Committee decide that we are using double agency tawarruk. That is okay. Yeah. So that is okay. No problem. Yeah. But if J. Azizuddin is the Sharia auditor for Bank A, so you must follow Bank A Sharia Committee decision lah. Tak boleh lah follow decision yang Bank B. And Sharia auditor, you can also highlight contohnya Sharia Committee buat a different decision altogether yang against SAC. Without SAC, contohnya possible SAC tak perasan, tak aware. We shouldn't be happening. But SAC are not aware of what is SAC decision. But you definitely know about what is SAC decision. So these are the points that you may highlight to the Shariah committee. Yeah, I hope I'm answering question number 1. Then of course, when you talk about Islamic bank, Islamic commercial bank, DFI have a different way of doing business, maybe. So the decision of the Shariah committee might also be different. Okay, Islamic bank receive additional capital injection from conventional parent bank. Boleh, tapi boleh bukan tak boleh bagi, tapi kena termsnya kena Shariah compliant. So your conventional parent bank gives you tawarruk, gives you qard, gives you musyarakah. Termsnya kena Shariah compliant. Kan di satu bank, dia kan parent bank yang tu kan, they should understand because it is subsidiary or whatnot. So that should be the way. Okay. Now, Edna Koshi, should there be a conflict of opinions between Shariah committee of a bank and the Shariah advisor of a fund management company? How can such situation be resolved? Is there an escalation process for resolution? Okay. Shariah committee and Shariah advisor of fund management company. Okay. Now, this could be the situation of which you have a Shariah committee, okay, on the bank, and then bank would like to provide or to one of the service that they are offering is subscribing or offering the fund management, unit trust, for example, of any Islamic unit trust company. Okay, so you got the wakalah, you got the service fee. Okay, now in this case, normally, okay, you will be, one of the condition of the bank is that make sure that it is Shariah compliant unit trust, and it's always good to get the Shariah endorsement of the unit trust that you want to distribute, that you want to provide to your client. Your wealth management, contohnya, they are doing that. So that is number 1. Now it's always based on resolution of which, okay, I also myself, for example, in one, I might not be banks have, we would like to subscribe to Cagamas bond, for example. It's provided by Cagamas, Shariah compliant, because Cagamas have their Shariah committee, right? But if I'm not that very comfortable, then I would ask bank to do the discussion, invite Cagamas, come and then let's discuss. Do presentation, I ask questions and whatnot, let's resolve it. Yeah, let's resolve it. It's always way. Sometimes if we don't, there is no interaction like this, it's based on perception. I thought of, I'm not happy, I don't, kind of things. But when you have a discussion, resolve it, then actually, there's not much issues. It's more that I misunderstand, the information given not sufficient, then after listening to you, I'm okay. Or even you have put some conditions, but okay, we give you that this condition, can you redo? Can you amend? For example, right? And if they want to do the business, they do it. So that's always a good process to do that. Yeah. Bring this Shariah committee together with the Shariah advisor, have a discussion, and let's resolve it by way of amending now and then, or get clarification and whatnot. I think that can be done. Or if, for example, after that what we call it process have been done, still differences of views, simply say that don't take it because it's going to be very risky on your side. If you are taking, for example, the unit trust of the Shariah committee, which is approved by one unit trust fund management, but your Shariah committee do disagree with that. Now, the one who ensure it is Shariah compliant or not is Shariah committee of your bank, not the fund management company, because you are just distributing it only, right? So it's going to be very difficult for your Shariah committee to give you as in Shariah clearance on your side. So don't do that. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.
Sorry, Dr. Rusni, I just wanted to clarify, because In this case, it could be a situation where the fund management company could be actually the management company of the fund.
Okay.
And the bank is, say, offering custodian services, but the bank, they have their own Shariah committee. So in the event of any conflict between the Shariah advisor of the manager and the committee of the bank, could there be a process where the matter could be escalated perhaps to the SAC, or I'm just trying to see, what are the options available? Yeah.
Number one is that try to do that, Edina. Okay, just now. You need to bring your Shariah committee and the Shariah advisor together and discuss things together. Because my experience that most often than not, because of not clear in terms of the information.
I see.
One, it is done, then fine. Or number two is that there could be small things that need to be amended from that side or our side. Then it can be resolved. But still, if it is persistently, then my advice is that don't take it. That's going to be very difficult. Okay. Now the question is that can you bring to the Securities Commission?
Yeah.
Okay. Now this also under SGPD also talks about this. What we call it, if there is any conflicting, can we bring to the Shariah, can we bring to the, what we call it, Bank Negara or Securities Commission? Now, when you look, to me, personally, Edna, is that I don't see that that is under their roles and responsibility. Yeah, but if they want to extend, fine. To me, if there is any differences still that you cannot resolve, okay, you may notify them. You may notify them to mitigate the risk, but you need to resolve either by your own just now. The worst case scenario, just do some kind of mediation kind of thing. Third party, take the external parties. I think that would be better rather than bring to the Securities Commission or even Bank Negara. I mean that in this case, of course, this is a Securities Commission because you're talking about fund management, right?
In your experience, has this kind of situation ever occurred? I mean, in the past, maybe there's a precedent,
No, I don't find any case that brought to the Securities Commission yet at this point of time. Even Bank Negara.
Okay.
Yep. Normally we resolve it at our level.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Rusni.
Okay. Why can't, if a wrong document catered for conventional financing with all the words borrowing, debt, interest has been accidentally executed for an Islamic financing deal, but due to urgency of such deal, mega project syndication, where there is no time for re-execution of the agreements, could we rectify the shortfall by getting SAC's exceptional clearance that the financing will still follow? Okay. How an Islamic is being offered? Okay. First is that it shouldn't be. This is a big no, actually. As of now, I think industry-wise, when we say industry, banks as well as the panel lawyer, the lawyers are also familiar with all these matters, actually. So we shouldn't be using all those conventional words or conventional things and whatnot. And it's always good for you to refer to the bank. Bank may have their standard template for the documents. I believe that banks may, what we call it, many banks have their standard template. So no such thing to having this kind of, mistake anymore. Because just to share with you, this can be a very, very painful examination and cross-examination in the court. If the case were brought to court of law, I know because I've been parties to it, parties as an expert. And then you need to decide, is borrowing is Shariah compliant? Is interest is Shariah compliant thing? And there's a lot of, it's not easy. Your 2 months is going to be 3 years and 5 years. Have yet to resolve. Don't do that. Okay. Now, if that is already been executed, okay, then you need to bring this matter to the Shariah committee Okay, I think not SAC, not the SAC level. So SAC is Shariah Advisory Council of Bank Negara. But I believe this is more on Shariah Committee. You bring it back to the Shariah Committee, what we call it, attention, and look whether, that using of that template is still is okay or not okay. They will. I cannot give immediate comment because look at the content. If the content it does not affect, if the terms does not affect the principles of Shariah just now, then still okay. So it's always good for you to bring to this to your Shariah committee attention. Yep. Okay. Then the exception cannot be if it is non-compliant. The Shariah committee will say that it is non-compliant. But how to what we call it, resolve the issue? Just now I mentioned that if it's already been done, profit is already been, then so that need to be cleansed out. Not to say that you cannot do the contract, no, but you need to re-execute the contract based on the Shariah contract. Yeah, based on the Shariah one. So basically we're talking about restructure. We have a new document. Yep. If, however, the document is less serious, for example, maybe, so that's why you need to get your legal department, you need to the Shariah committee and whatnot to look into detail of it. Okay. Then it could be addendum, but if the need be, you need to have a fresh document. Yep. And whatever profit that you have already generated, then you have to cleanse it. That's it. You can continue as it is afterward. Not to say that you cannot do the contract altogether. No. Okay, here, supplemental, the drafter to rectify that mistake or Shariah position is so strict. Okay, I think I've answered that. Okay. Advice from S3, not SAC, Shariah committee, yes. The answer to that. Is the advice from SAC is final? Yes, Shariah advice from Shariah committee of the bank, of Islamic financial institution is final one. Yep. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I've taken 15 minutes of your time already, or 10 minutes. Okay. So thank you very much. Hope to see you around somewhere. Sometime. Okay, over to you, Aini.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rusni, for the presentation for today.